Hey everybody, the next project on my 1966 Lincoln Continental is going into the upside down and removing the mind flare from behind my dashboard. Okay, no, this is not an episode of Stranger Things, although it does look like it. But with the dashboard now out of the car, I want to remove the remaining parts that are mounted to the firewall. So I am going to start on that passenger side and work my way over to the driver's side, removing everything that is mounted. So let's go ahead and get started. All right, you can see that there's some wires that go underneath the carpet here. And in order to pull that back, I'm gonna pull off the kick panel. And in order to pull off the kick panel, I am gonna remove this chrome door sill as well as this plastic scuff pad. Now the door sill is being held on with 8 Phillips headed screws. Scuff pad is being held on with 5 Phillips headed screws. So let's go ahead and pull that off so we can pull off the kick panel. And we can now remove the kick panel. It's just being held on with 1 screw that's trying to hide here, but we'll use a Phillips headed screwdriver to get that off. All right, with the kick panel out of the way, it does expose some wiring. However, I'm not gonna play with the wiring just yet. I want to pull out the wiring harness at one time, and I'm gonna wait till everything is off of the firewall. So for now, I'm gonna move to the middle of the firewall and remove all of these AC ducts and see what else is necessary to remove from the middle of the firewall. Next, we're going to remove a couple of vacuum lines that go to the vacuum actuators. There's going to be one on the driver's side, one on the passenger side. And interestingly, there's this one that's like a reddish, brownish, black color. We're going to remove that here from the driver's side. And then the one that's both bluish and black over here to the passenger side, we'll remove that one as well. Next, we're going to remove the AC air distribution plenum, which also includes the vacuum actuators. Now you'll see that there's some studs that come through the firewall. It looks like there's going to be 2 on the driver's side, 2 on the passenger side, and we're going to pull that off with a 7/16 socket. Now, given that the original intention of pulling the dash and pulling all of this out was to get to the evap and heater core box that is on the firewall inside of the engine bay, I believe these are the 2 studs that are attached to it. So this is necessary in order to get that box out. At this point, anything on the firewall on the passenger side and above the transmission tunnel is just electrical, and we're going to remove that later. So now we're going to focus on removing the brake pedal, and the brake pedal is being held on with what appears to be 2 half-inch bolts that go perpendicular to the ground. So let's go ahead and take those out now. Next, we're going to remove the whole parking brake assembly, which includes the pedal itself, as well as the vacuum-controlled parking brake release actuator setup. And it's being held on with 1 9/16 bolt to the firewall, so let's get that out now. With this now pulled back from the firewall, we can remove the cotter pin that's holding on the e-brake cable. Next, behind this clump of wires, you'll see that we have the AC vacuum control assembly, and we're gonna pull that out now. Now, there aren't any bolts up top. It will slide down once we remove the 2 3/8 bolts that are underneath. And there is also one wiring connection that we do need to disconnect. All right, we're getting close. It's primarily just wiring on the firewall now. However, we have a few cables to remove. I'm going to remove the speedometer cable, and I'm going to do that by removing a rubber grommet on the engine bay side of the car. There's also the e-brake cable, which is being bolted in here, which is on the inside of the fender well, so I'm going to do that as well. And then there's also the radio antenna, and I believe that there's going to be a rubber grommet I need to pop out, and then that will fish through the firewall. And we'll first start with a speedometer cable right here in the engine bay. Speedo cable out. All right, we're now approaching the driver's side inner fender well, and the goal here is to remove both the antenna as well as the e-brake cable. Now the antenna has a rubber grommet that looks like it's already been removed, so we just need to pull this through the firewall, and I need to remove this insulation here that goes over the bolts to remove the e-brake cable. We'll just keep this in the fender well for now, and we'll remove it later. Great, that now exposes the 2 half-inch bolts to remove this e-brake cable. Great, with those 2 cables and antenna removed, it now appears that the only thing on the firewall is the wiring harness and the insulation. So next step is to remove the kick panel, and in order to remove the kick panel, we're gonna have to remove the chrome sill plate being held on with 8 Phillips headed screws, as well as the inner scuff pad being held on with 5 Phillips headed screws. And now we can remove the kick panel, which is just being held on with 1 Phillips headed screw. With the kick panel off, it's now exposing the wiring that we want to take out, and I believe it's only the wiring that is left, but in order to be able to get the wiring out, I need to pull the carpet back, and in order to pull the carpet back, I'm going to have to remove the gas pedal, and it's being held on with 2 3/8 nuts on the back side of the pedal. And with those 2 nuts now off of the back, you can see the bracket here. It appears underneath the carpet, there may be 2 other 3/8 bolts that are mounting the gas pedal to the floorboard. All right, with the gas pedal now out of the way, we can remove the front section of the carpeting to expose more of the wiring harness. You will notice that I did have 1 casualty, and this is the plastic piece or rubber piece that goes onto the floor mat here that was in front of the gas pedal. So if you know anybody that can fix that without me having to replace the full carpeting, please let me know in the comments, because I would like to keep the original carpet. All right, next I'm going to remove the insulation on both sides, but you'll notice as I start to pull it up, most of it will separate, but some of the foil is sticking to the padding. So I'm going to either use a plastic scrape tool, or I might try to use a little bit of heat to pull this up to see if it is reusable. All right, with the insulation out of the way, we're now going to remove the rear seat AC ducts. They're the hard plastic ducts. It appears that they're being held on with about 16 Phillips headed screws. And the reason we need to lift that up is there's wiring that goes across the floorboard. And so because I'm pulling out the full wiring harness, we're gonna get that out of the way as well. We're now to the point where we can remove the dashboard wiring harness, which starts just behind the kick panel on the driver's side, and the wiring harness goes across the firewall and then down to the passenger side just behind the kick panel. So let's go ahead and get started on this now. We're going to start behind the kick panel on the passenger side, and the first thing we're going to do is remove these 2 wire loom clamps. I believe that's a series of about 13 of them, and they're each being held on with a 3/8 bolt. So let's go ahead and pull those off now. All right, with those wire loom clamps off, it exposes a series of about 6 wire connectors, 3 black, 1 red, 1 blue, 1 white. I do not believe the white one needs to be disconnected, but I will verify that later. And then there's also going to be 2 wires here that go to the door jamb switch or courtesy light switch, which appears to be the black and blue on top and the green and yellow on bottom. So let's go ahead and disconnect those now. right, now moving up, we're going to remove the wire connectors that are underneath the passenger side fender well. So I'm gonna go outside the car, remove those, and then we'll be able to push those through. All right, here we are inside of the passenger side fender well. You'll see that there's 2 wire connectors here, one black, one yellow. Once those are disconnected, we'll then be able to remove that rubber grommet and be able to pull that wiring harness into the cab of the car. All right, back inside the cab of the car, we're now gonna remove that rubber grommet. Next, we're going to remove this ground wire using a 3/8 socket. All right, a correction from earlier. I had said that I didn't think that we needed to remove this white wiring connector, but we do. Why is that? Because one side of the connection will go along the bottom of the firewall, and the other side of the connection will go up to the top of the firewall. So if I was removing it all in one piece, yes, I could leave it connected, but I'm going to actually remove the bottom part of the wiring harness and the top part of the wiring harness so that they're 2 separate pieces. As you can see, we have some clear separation of the bottom wiring harness and the top wiring harness. So we're going to continue up working on the top wiring harness. And there's these 2 wire covers, and they're being held on with a total of what appears to be 3 3/8 bolts. Next, we're going to unbolt this barrier terminal block, which is being held on with 2 5/16 bolts. We'll then remove the horn relay, which is being held on with a 3/8 bolt, and this wire loom clamp, also 3/8 bolt. We're now done with everything on the passenger side, and we're moving now over to the driver's side. And we're going to start with a series of wire loom clamps. We have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. All 6 of those are being held on. Well, actually, only 5 of them are being held on. We had already removed 1 previously. So those 5 are being held on with 3/8 bolts. Then we have a plate here with 3 rubber grommets that have the wire connectors going through into the passenger side fender well. That's being held on with what appears to be 3 5/16 bolts, and that will allow those wire connectors to come out. Now, I have already previously unplugged those wire connectors. I will link in the description to that video. So we won't have to go to the driver's side fender well yet. We will later, but not now. So let's go ahead and pull these off. All right, moving our way down. We have 2 more wire loom clamps plus a ground wire, all 3/8 bolts. So let's pull those out now. All right, we're in the home stretch now, and it looks like we just have these 2 wire loom clamps, again, 3/8 bolts, and then we can disconnect these wires, and that should be everything to get the top part of the dashboard wiring harness out of the car. All right, we're now to the point where we're going to disconnect these 3 wiring connectors, black, white, and red. And then we're gonna come in here and disconnect the 2 wires that are going to the door jamb switch or the courtesy light switch. And again, it's the black and blue on top, green and yellow on the bottom. And that is a wrap. The full wiring harness, the top part that is, can now come out of the car. All right, with the main dashboard wiring harness out of the way, we're now going to remove the lower wiring harness that goes from the passenger side, is taped down to the floorboard, and goes all the way to the driver's side. And you'll notice here that there's a section that goes through into the driver's side fender well. So let's go ahead and go outside and see what's needed to disconnect the wiring. All right, we're now entering the fender well area, and as you can see, I already have some parts removed, so I will link in the description for any of the video content for removing that. But right here, just about in the center of the screen, is where the wiring comes through from the cab of the car into the fender well, and it's going to go just behind that antenna setup that you see here, and then there's going to be a couple of wires here that just need to be disconnected, so we can go ahead and do that now. And now back here in the cab of the car, we're gonna go ahead and remove this rubber grommet and then pull the wires through. And we have one last connector to undo. All right, all the wiring is disconnected, but I do need to remove the tape that's holding it down to the floorboard. And then there's also a series of about 6 of these plastic straps, each one being held on with 2 Phillips headed screws. So I'm gonna pull all of those out, and then the wiring should come right out. All right, and now the harness can come out. Done. All right, everything's off the firewall. We're done, right? Wrong. Now we come to the center here for the main reason that the seat is out and the dashboard is out, to get something out from underneath the hood. And because I plan on doing a full detail of the engine bay, the piece that I need to take off is this box that holds the evap core and heater core. And that is mounted with studs that go through the firewall and are removed from underneath where the dashboard was. Let me show you. There's a total of 6 studs on the back side of that evap core and heater core box. You'll notice that 3 of these studs do not have nuts on them. They're not missing. Those were removed when other parts of the dashboard had to come off the car. So now I just needed to remove 1, 2, 3 nuts, and those appear to be a 7/16, and we'll use the deep socket. So when I took off the last piece of hardware, it didn't move or jiggle at all. So it's either some missing hardware that I haven't found yet, or it's just kind of pried up against the firewall, and we just need to get it loose. Let's see if this works. So far, so good. And there, it's out. And that's a wrap. Everything that was mounted to the firewall, both on the inside cab of the car and the main piece of what I was trying to get out, which was the heater core and evap core box, is now out of the engine bay. And that's going to allow me to continue on with the original intent, which is to detail the full engine bay. But before I get into that, I'm going to now start on the next project, which is removing all of the front suspension and steering box. So stay tuned for more content on the restoration of my 1966 Lincoln Continental. Thanks, guys.